Welcome to this seminar with Emre Yolcu, who's going to talk about the proof systems that come up in the context of satisfiability solving and proof logging, and also interesting in their own right. So the talk is titled Exponential Separations Using Guarded Extension Variables. And without further ado, Emre, it's over to you.
Thank you, Jakob. This will be a solving proof complexity mostly. Jakob told me not to expect anybody to be that familiar with proof complexity here, so I added some slides with some very brief intro. So this is a formal definition of a proof system. You have propositional formulas, and a proof system is formally a polynomial time computable relationship that is sound and complete. And that means that soundness means that if you accept a claimed proof, then that means that the formula is unsatisfiable, meaning that the proof is valid. So you can also think of the proof system as the verifier that checks claimed proofs of a formula. And by proof, throughout this talk, I mean a proof of unsatisfiability. I may also say refutation of a formula. And completeness says that if a formula is unsatisfiable, then there must exist some proof of this, such that the verifier will accept the proof. And all of proof complexity actually studies less abstract systems than this. Often they're more concrete. They will have inference rules. They will have some single line certificates, which may be a list of polynomials and other objects. So although this is the way it's formally defined, almost no proof complexity is conducted with this one, at least of the concrete systems. And proof complexity is completely concerned with this quantity, which is the minimum size of a proof in a proof system. So this is, you can think of this as the proof as being encoded by some bit string or some string over a finite alphabet. And the size p gamma is the minimum proof size of a given formula. If the formula is satisfiable, then it will have no proof. And then this will be infinite. And in proof complexity, you pick some proof systems and study what happens to this quantity. The big question is whether this quantity, there exists a proof system that is polynomially bounded, and that says that for all formulas, you require the proof system to have polynomial size proofs of that formula, and size with respect to the size of the formula here. So if there exists a proof system with short proofs for every single unsatisfiable formula, that's the question, the main question of proof complexity. Although not all lines of research in proof complexity necessarily work towards settling that question. And often you also have multiple proof systems that you try to relate to one another. So a proof system is said to stimulate another if you have P and Q, and if you can convert proofs in Q into proofs in P with polynomial overhead, then P is said to stimulate. And you also compare systems by separating them. For instance, you can exhibit formulas that are easy for P in the sense that they have short proofs in P, but they necessarily require long proofs in Q. And this is a separation between P and Q. So in proof complexity, you fix some concrete proof systems and try to determine their relative strength with respect to the stimulation and separation. And Jakob mentioned that the proof system that I'm talking about will come from SAT solving. Again, I'm assuming that you're not familiar with SAT solving, but this will be the only slide on SAT solving. So in practice, the SAT solvers are algorithms that take as input some formula and decide whether it's satisfiable. And all of the combinatorial solvers that are used in actual practice are based on backtracking search plus some tricks on top of backtracking search. And by backtracking search, I mean you're given a formula over some variables. You say, is this variable assigned to true or false? And then you explore some subtree, and then you continue in this manner. And then you may find that some assignment is failing, and then you go back and then try other assignments. And on top of this, during the search, you may do some extra things. And it's standard that when a solver says a formula is unsatisfiable, it doesn't just stop at that. It also gives you a proof that you can check. And this will, in this way, you can check whether unsatisfiable formula independent of whether the solver is actually correct or not. So, and in this way, you can use stat solvers to prove theorems, propositional theorems. And there are roughly 3 dominant paradigms. There have been roughly 3 dominant paradigms throughout history in combinatorial stat solving. There are, of course, some other algorithms, but those are the standard ones. By modern, I will say what I mean. And each of the algorithms correspond with some caveats to proof search in those proofs. So DPLL you can think of as just brute force tree search plus extra things, which are not important right now. So DPLL amounts to searching for tree-like resolution proofs. And I will again say what resolution is later. CDCL is like a more modern version of this DPLL, which is general resolution proof. So, and what I mean by tree-like and general is in resolution, you have 2 clauses, and from those 2 clauses, you derive new clauses. And then you can draw a proof DAG in this manner that indicates which 2 clauses a clause is derived from. This can either be a tree or it can be a general DAG, which means that once you derive a certain clause, you can reuse it in general resolution. And in tree-like, you're supposed to rederive that, so you need to repeat subderivation in a sense. And by modern, I mean the actual solvers that people claim are doing really interesting things. And this is CDCL plus changes to the formula. So during the search and before the search, these modern solvers not only search, but also rewrite the formula during the search, over which they're looking for some assignments. And the techniques that they employ actually are not succinctly expressible in general resolution. So then you could say, in a sense, that they're searching for extended resolution proofs, although they're not necessarily going to find the shortest proof or anything. And this correspondence also leads to these systems being used to log the proofs that these systems are finding. So I said that they're expected to emit proofs when they claim unsatisfiability. So for a CDCL solver, you expect it to emit a general resolution proof. And for a modern solver, general resolution proof may be too long, and then you expect it to emit an extended resolution proof. And I said that, but actually there are different systems that are being used in practice that generalize general resolution and extended resolution. Here are the acronyms. Sorry about the bullshit, but the RUP is reverse unit propagation, which is a generalization of general resolution. But general resolution also polynomial simulates RUP in the sense that I mentioned in the previous slide. But you have some slowdown, and in practice, these slowdowns start to become important. So practitioners wanted to have the most efficient proof system that they could have that is also nice to work with. And similar situation, a similar situation is true for extended resolution. So instead of extended resolution, you work with a system that actually generalizes extended resolution in the sense that each extended resolution proof is a proof in this derived system that I'm showing. And extended resolution also stimulates derived, but with some overlap. Yeah, and I mentioned DPL is named after its creators. CDCL corresponds to conflict-driven fault learning, where roughly while doing search, when you find an assignment that is not going to work, so it leads to a conflict or false clause, then you do some analysis and learn some new clause and expand your original formula with some additional constraints, which later also constrain how you're doing this work. Okay. And this talk is specifically going to be about this phrase, which you use a lot when writing proofs. So I mentioned that modern solvers go beyond resolution. And what they do can be, or at least I like to summarize it as, they carry out some reasoning without loss of generality. And this means that you are going to make some assumptions which are not necessarily going to be logically implied but by the hypothesis that you have at hand. And resolution, we know, general resolution, we know cannot necessarily express those all kinds of broad reasoning in a succinct manner. And I mentioned this derived system, and I mentioned that it generalizes extended resolution. So the reason that extended resolution is useful and good is because it has succinct proofs of many kinds of formulas. And the way it allows is that allows you to make definitions so that you can shorten some formulas and then reason about the truth of these entire formulas by way of their short description. So this is like a vague way of putting how extended resolution works. And when you generalize it to that derived system that I mentioned, you get a system where if you say, well, you still have your rules, however you define them, but you don't have access to new variables now, you still get systems that make sense and are still surprisingly powerful. So the topic of this talk is actually the restrictions of this derived system, which you obtain by first generalizing extended resolution and then restricting it back so that you don't allow any new variables. And I will make all of these more formal and clear later on. And this kind of reasoning is quite powerful because, and the reason you use it in your proof while writing them informally is also it either simplifies how you write the proof or it shortens the entire proof. So that is quite a natural concept to study from the perspective of proof complexity. You can say, what does this bind in terms of proof length? And I'll give an example that is common in proof complexity. There is a tautology in proof complexity which is standard for proving lower bounds, length lower bounds for proof systems, and encodes the pigeonhole principle. The pigeonhole principle says that you cannot have a one-to-one mapping from n elements to n-1 elements. And there is a short extended resolution proof of that. And the spirit of the proof is actually exploits being able to reason without loss of generality in the manner direction. So you say roughly that in the proof that an arbitrary injection maps the n elements to the n-1st element. And this is not necessarily implied. And then you need to justify when you make such assumptions that you can make. And here, at least in the case of the pigeonhole principle, the way you justify it is, okay, you say, you give me some injection that falsifies my assumption. Well, I could convert it into another injection, which then satisfies my assumption. If I'm only concerned with the fact whether such injections exist or not, I might as well assume that I'm working with this one, which is nice for my purposes. So these proof systems that I'm going to talk about generally have justifications of this sort for the assumptions that they allow you to. Yeah. And the key concept that they are built on is redundancy. So redundancy of a clause with respect to a formula means that when you add the clause to the formula, you don't change its satisfiability status. So often in proof systems that allow you to add clauses, you have something more strict than this. You require that whatever you're adding be logically implied by the formula. So any assignment to all the variables that satisfies your formula also has to satisfy anything that you can derive. So this is a more relaxed notion. It just says that if there is some assignment that satisfies your formula, after you add this extra clause to your formula, then there is still some assignment, not necessarily the same one, maybe a different one, that satisfies the formula. And this way, you are allowed to derive clauses that are not implied, and this is what I mean by reasoning without loss of generality. So you can think of this clause C as being the assumption that you are making without loss of generality. And like I said, this is weaker than logical implication. And this here is notation for what I just said in words. So this means that if you take a total assignment to the variables of this formula, then it's gonna, and if it satisfies this formula, then it's also the same assignment is also going to satisfy this. So for clauses of this kind that are redundant, you don't necessarily have that relation. And this is also a bit of a semantic property in that you cannot necessarily check it efficiently. For instance, with respect to a unsatisfiable formula, the empty clause is redundant. So if you were making proof systems that proceeded by adding redundant clauses, you shouldn't take this to be your criteria of redundancy. And when defining these proof systems, it's useful to characterize redundancy in a slightly different manner, because by looking at this characterization, you are able to put some restrictions on it, which give you syntactic properties, which you can check efficiently and make proofs out of. And this efficient checkability is due to the fact that I said earlier that proof systems need to be polynomial time computable relationship. So if I give you a proof, you ought to be able to check whether it's a valid proof or not efficiently. So yeah, and by the way, feel free to ask questions about anything at any time. Anything unclear. Yeah, so a clause is redundant if and only if there exists an assignment such that this holds. And let's parse this together. So this means that you're restricting your formula under a partial assignment. And what that means is you look at your formula, let's say it's a CNF, it's a set of clauses. And then for each variable, you substitute the value that this assignment assigns to that variable. And then if some clause has a variable that is satisfied, then that clause disappears. If it has a variable that is falsified, then you delete that variable from the clause, and the clause, the restricted version of the clause stays in the formula. And this says that if you have an assignment that satisfies your formula, but falsifies the thing that you're trying to add as redundant, let's say, to the formula, then I could first apply another assignment, and then on top of that, apply the assignment that satisfies your formula but falsifies this clause, so that the clause with this additional assumption made is satisfied. Okay. And this you can think of as saying that if you give me an assignment that only satisfies the formula, then I could make some changes to it in such a way that with the additional assumption, it also satisfies the new formula. Okay. Are you familiar with the symbols here, and that makes sense? Okay. And instead of working with that semantic criteria, you work with syntactic criteria that you can decide efficiently for the redundancy of the clause with respect to a formula. So the simplest notion that is known is this notion of a block clause. And this is a clause C, which with a distinguished literal P, let's say. And we say that such a clause is a block clause, BC, for P with respect to a formula, if for all the clauses that have the complement of this distinguished literal, this clause is tautological. And this is actually coming from the resolution proof system, where resolution says that the resolvent of these two clauses is this. So you can more concisely say that for this clause, all of its resolvents upon this distinguished literal P are tautological. And tautological clauses are in a sense useless to derive in a proof. So here you justify redundancy by saying, well, if I could add this clause, and if I made all the possible results, I would be getting nothing extra. So maybe that's one way to justify why this type of a clause is redundant, but here's the better reason that uses the characterization that I just wrote. So if you have a block clause, then if you remember this characterization here, I'm trying to exhibit a partial assignment such that this kind of relationship holds, which would show that the clause is redundant. So for a block clause, you immediately have an assignment that just assigns this distinguished literal to 1. And with this assignment, we will have this. So why is that? You start by considering some total assignment to this point that satisfies this point. Okay. And I'm claiming that this formula is now satisfied by this assignment, which is the composition of this one, tau and alpha. And what this means is you first apply tau when applying this assignment. And then for things that were not assigned by tau, you apply alpha. And this assignment is, if you notice, just alpha with its assignment of alpha p flipped. And that is because, so if alpha satisfies this, then you know that it falsifies C. If it falsifies C, it assigns everything in C to false. In particular, it assigns P to false. Okay. And so why should you believe this? Because I just made a change to the assignment. I mean, I told you that alpha was already satisfying gamma, but maybe some clauses in gamma depended on alpha assigning P to false to be satisfied. So I need to also say that making this change to alpha, flipping its assignment of P, didn't suddenly break some of the clauses in gamma by making them unsatisfiable. Well, then we look at this condition for a block list. What this says is these are the only kinds of clauses that could become unsatisfied when you flipped alpha's assignment of P. Because alpha was assigning P to false, now it's assigning P to true, so this literal is no longer satisfied. So if this was the only literal through which alpha was satisfying this clause, then it could become unfalsified. But you have this condition that C prime D prime be tautological. And that means that there are two complementary literals in C prime D prime. And since alpha assigns the entirety of C prime to false as well, there must be some literal in D prime, which alpha after this fix still assigns to still satisfies. Okay. Is this understandable? What I'm saying, in other words, is there is some backup literal that alpha is satisfying, which also means alpha is satisfying this clause through. And so in the end, alpha is actually doubly satisfying this clause. So if I flip alpha's assignment of this one, this literal will become unsatisfied, but there is some other literal that still is satisfied by alpha. So when I make this fix to alpha to make sure that it also satisfies the C, I didn't break anything in gamma. Only some clauses were doubly satisfied in the sense that they had two literals in them, which were set to true by alpha. And now there is just one, but it's not zero. So alpha is satisfied. No. And then you have this notion. We will later make proof systems out of this notion by saying you can now add block clauses to a formula. And before doing that, let me tell you about some generalizations of this formula, because we will make multiple proof systems out of these kinds of rules and compare them. So one is called this resolution asymmetric tautology. Don't worry about the name at all. It's almost exactly the same definition, except you say this clause is tautological, namely it contains two complementary literals, or it's subsumed by gamma. And subsumed means that there is some clause in gamma which is a subset of this clause. Okay, and all of these are actually restrictions of this implication relationship. So you basically take this definition and you relax this to relationships that you can efficiently compute. Okay. So remember that this is a different rule. And then there are other ways you could generalize this rule. you could say, well, why am I only flipping a single literal assignment? I could be flipping multiple literal assignments as well. And then you say, okay, instead of a distinguished literal, I have a distinguished set of literals in the formula. And then this part of the condition becomes a bit more complicated, but don't worry about that. And then think about what this is. So here, this is actually C except P, and this is actually B except not B. Here you are looking at, again, a natural generalization of that kind of clause. You say this is C except L, and this is B except minus the negation of L. And then you ask this to be tautological. You could also mix and match. You could say, well, I want this to be tautological, or substitute and get a different proof system as well. But yeah, so those are the three rules that we will be mostly concerned with. And we will make inference rules out of these, like I said. So we will be talking about concrete proof systems in which proofs are a sequence of formulas that you derive from one another with respect to the rules of the proof system. So for a derivation is a derivation of a clause in a proof system from a formula is a sequence of formulas such that you start with the formula, the initial formula that you're given, and you end with a formula that contains the clause that you want to derive. And then at each step, when moving from one formula to another, you want your formula to follow from the previous formula in the proof by some rule of P, which I will now give examples of. So there is the resolution rule, which is one of the most commonly studied proofs in proof complexity. And that says that if in my CNF I have these two clauses, then I add this to my CNF, and now I have a different CNF with one more clause. And often when I say just a proof and not a derivation in the proof system that we are considering, I mean by that the derivation of the empty clause from your original formula. Since so according to the rules of the proof systems we are considering, each of the CNFs in the sequence will be equisatisfiable to the previous CNF. So if you're deriving something that is obviously unsatisfiable in the end, then that's a proof that your original CNF was also unsatisfiable. So a resolution proof proceeds by adding clauses in this manner to the formula until it's able to apply this rule to some variables such that A and B are empty, and it derives the empty clause, and at that point the proof is done. And we will also take as our size measure the length of those proofs. So capital N here, for instance, I will say is the size of the proof. You have other rules. So I mentioned extended resolution, for instance. In extended resolution, because we are working with CNFs, it needs to be a little bit more contrived, but roughly what you do is you're able to make definitions of this kind. Okay, so you require, when making this definition, that X be a new variable in the sense that it doesn't yet occur in your formula. And these P and Q are arbitrary literals. They could be anything, but again, without much of generality, they are literals that or literals over variables that already appear in your formula. Okay, and these two rules will get you the extended resolution system, which, like I said, already buys you a lot of power. And you will also be concerned with the redundancy-based proof systems. So I showed you three criteria for syntactic redundancy. So you can then make up a rule that says, add to my formula any syntactically redundant clause. So it's a block clause. You can have a block clause rule that says, add a block clause, or add a resolution asymmetric tautology wrap clause, or add a set block clause, STP clause. And also, there is a rule that might seem peculiar at first. You are able to remove clauses from your CNF as well. So you not only add some clauses, but you can say, I want to forget about these clauses in my formula and we'll continue. You were just thinking about resolution, for instance. Having this rule on top of resolution doesn't buy you any power. because why derive something that you're forgetting? But for these systems, they're a bit unusual in the sense that being able to remove clauses may buy you extra power. Because they were, and you see this intuitively by the way that they're defined. For instance, the block clause rule had a universally quantified statement over all the clauses in the formula. So maybe I have some formula which I can resolve my some clause which I can resolve my clause against, such that the result is not tautological. If only I didn't have that clause, I would be able to derive the clause that I want. And maybe the clause that has this property is something that enables a really short proof later on. So you can say, hey, I'm removing some clauses and I got to my goal. And then I had some intermediate clauses which prevent a later clause that I really won't like to derive from being blocked. So I just forget about some clauses and then derive that clause, and then you can have proofs that go like this. So in the context of these redundancy-based systems, deletion is a notable word. And this is my notation for the proof system. So ER is extended resolution. It's the extension resolution rule plus the expansion rule. BC, I use the same abbreviations for the systems and the types of redundancy criteria. So BC is this resolution rule plus block clause addition. And BC minus is BC without new variables. And what I mean by this is, when telling you about the definition of a block clause, I didn't say anywhere that C had to contain variables that already occur in the formula. So for instance, you can see maybe easily that a formula, a clause that has a new variable is immediately blocked for that variable because the universally quantified condition is vacuously satisfied. So if I have something like X or C, and if X doesn't occur in the formula, then there is nothing, and not X doesn't occur in the formula, then there's nothing to check. So X or C is immediately a block clause, and I can derive it in this BC system, but not in this BC minus system. The interesting part about those systems is, so external resolution is okay, it's a strong system, but it only makes sense, its definition only makes sense if you are allowing new variables to be introduced by the rules of the system. These systems both generalize extended resolution and also make sense if you take away that freedom of having new variables. And on top of that, they turn out to be quite strong. And they're between resolution and extended. And then I have this notation, I prefix a proof system with D to indicate its variance with deletion. I could also have BBC minus, where I have both deletion and not the ability to introduce new clauses. And there is also this system that I alluded to but didn't really define and will not define because it's not really going to appear. Is resolution plus a redundancy criterion that is somewhat like a marriage of this SPC and RAT that I told you about. So in RAT, you were saying something is tautological or subsumed, and in SPC, you were saying instead of a distinguished literal in the clause, I'm looking at a set of distinguished literals. So you could be simultaneously looking at multiple literals and also saying that thing is tautological or subsumed, and that gives you this system, which turns out to be quite powerful. And I have some concrete examples finally of these definitions that I've been making. So here's a small formula, and here's a block clause. So let's go through this slowly. So this clause is blocked for both X and Y, but not Z. For it to be blocked, that only needs to exist a single literal for which it's blocked, but just for the sake of the example, I have multiple. So I'm saying it's blocked for X, and the way you see this is you look at the clauses containing not X, and there are two. You look at the resultant, which is you take this clause and this clause, remove X from this, remove not X from this, and look at the clause that you get out of these three literals, which is tautological in that it has Y and not Y simultaneously. And similarly for this one, you get Y, Z, and not Z. So this is also tautological, but it's not blocked for not Z. Why? Because you have these two clauses. So for this one, the result is actually tautological because you have x and y. Here, though, you only have x and y in the result, so it's not tautological. So if you didn't have this condition holding for x and y, for instance, this clause wouldn't be blocked. Okay, so this is the clause. There we go. Here's an example of a resolution rat clause. So immediately this clause is actually not rat with respect to formula. And I should also say, so a blocked clause, a clause that is not blocked cannot be made blocked if you added further clauses to the formula because of the way that it is defined. So it's just saying that for all the clauses in the formula, something has to hold, and that's condition is only about the two clauses that you're looking at, that you're taking the result. So, for instance, if you made some resolution steps, if you added some clauses here, you wouldn't. There's nothing that you can do to make this clause block or not. So BC has this condition property that it is actually kind of, you can think of it as a pre-processing system, in that you add some blocked clauses and you do all you can, and then the rest is a resolution derivation. So strat is different in the sense that we have a clause here that is not rat, but it will become rat after you do some resolution. Okay, and I also forgot. So here you could use deletion to make this clause block or not. For instance, this was the offending clause. So you can just get rid of this and then add this and then continue. Okay, this is how those systems work more or less. Yes. So you want to make this clause that, or in other words, you want to add this clause as a derive this clause in the rat. So you first add y or z via resolution. And also let's look at why this is not rat. So this is the only clause to check against. The result is y or z. And we said it should either be tautological or substitute. It's neither tautological nor substitute. So there is no clause that is a subset of y or z in the formula. So you can, by resolution, add the clause y or z. Now y or z is substitute because it's itself in the formula. So after you add y or z, then you can in that add this clause x. Okay. And also, you can derive this clause in this BC minus proof system as well without using any numerics, but you need to take a longer route. And remember, I was talking about simulation. So, for instance, it's a meaningful question to ask: can I simulate using this BC minus, this rat minus proof, because they have different rules? And then these simulations often go by saying, well, in this proof system, you added this clause using your rule. Well, I don't have that rule exactly, but I could maybe simulate that rule with a derivation. And if that derivation is short enough, maybe I can translate an entire proof in one system in another. So yeah, you're asking that question for this specific example, for instance, to derive this clause as a block clause, you need to do more work. First, you add these two clauses as block. Why? Because they're blocked for. So the only clause to check against is this, and you have a tautological clause at the end, and similarly here you have a tautological clause at the end. And again, you then resolve these two clauses, getting y or z, and then you resolve these two clauses in sequence against this clause. You got x. But you weren't still able to add x as the block clause. You first had to add some longer clauses, and then you have to do some resolutions. And this way you can imagine, you can maybe generalize this idea to convert a rat proof into a BC proof, although there's no guarantee right now that the proof will be small if you after this translation. And here we have the more complicated definition. This is actually vacuously set blocked. I should maybe switch the definition, switch the check for this one, because I don't want to go into set block clauses right now, maybe in the second half. The point of this is there is a set block with really small formula and a set block clause with respect to the formula such that it's not possible at all to derive this clause in the previous two systems. But this also doesn't happen that much with the usual proof systems, where everything you can derive is implied. So you know that eventually, if you derive something in a proof system, I will also be able to derive that in the other proof system. But here you are deriving things that are not implied, and you have different capabilities in the system. So you can see also maybe that this idea can be useful for separating the two proof systems, like SBC from BC minus or SBC from RAT minus. In that you could construct something where SBC is quickly refuting a formula by adding some clauses, which the others cannot even derive. Okay, and I mentioned that these systems differ from the usual proof systems in some way. And next talk about in what ways they do differ from the usual proof system. So suppose you have formulas such that delta is a superset of gamma, and you have a clause C and a partial assignment that does not satisfy. So most of the, or almost all of the proof systems that are commonly studied are monotone, in that if you can derive a clause from a formula, then from any formula that contains that formula, you could derive the same clause. But here again, you may have something that prevents your redundancy criterion from holding, so you may be unable to derive a clause which you could with respect to from a smaller formula. And the usual proof systems are sound in a stronger sense than I showed. So if you can derive clause C from a formula, then it's semantically implied. Soundness is the version of this implication where C is the empty clause only. So you're saying if I can derive the empty clause from my formula, then it is false. The soundness is just that, but you don't need strong soundness to have a proof system in the sense that I showed in the first slide. But most proof systems are regardless sound in this stronger sense. And this next one is a little harder to parse. Maybe it says that if you can derive a clause from a formula, I already told you what restrictions are. You basically evaluate a partial assignment and then look at the resulting formula. So Closure said if you can derive a clause from a formula, then you could restrict both the formula and the clause under the same assignment. And you could then derive the restricted version of the clause from the restricted version of the formula. And this is also even used or defined a little differently with a more in a more relaxed sense by saying, okay, you maybe don't have to be able to derive this itself immediately, but you can. Sorry, I misphrased that. This is also often used with the empty clause in place of C that says that if you can refute this formula, then you can refute its restriction in a proof whose size is not that much bigger from the proof of the original formula. And this property is quite useful in proof complexity, which you also use with those proof systems. So they're not necessarily closed in either of the senses that I discussed. And then this is what makes deletion so monotonicity. The loss of monotonicity is what makes deletion important, because from a larger clause you may become unable to derive something like I said before, and then you could then delete stuff and then make it derivable and continue. And to remind you again, the proof systems with arbitrary deletion that in the scope are d minus and d minus and etc. And I'm just writing them here to signify that we are concerned with the versions that do not have new variables. The ones that do have new variables are already as strong as expandable. I have one last.
Sort of makes sense. I mean, I think about this. This is a little bit mysterious at first, but so you're looking for proof systems that can do without loss of generality reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of makes sense that you would lose monotonicity, because like if I have the pigeonhole principle and then I can, without loss of generality, everything is nice. But then suppose I constrain it even more and say, oh, and by the way, all even pigeons go into odd holes and vice versa. Mm-hmm. Then it's already clear that no, then it's not without loss in reality that pigeon n plus 1 goes into whole n, because then I'm maybe violating my even odd condition. So somehow symmetry was possible to argue by in a weaker formula, but now I've over constrained it and I lost my symmetry. And I guess this is sort of what maybe is at play in these other properties also.
And it also has to do with the fact that your inferences are not local in the sense of, let's say, for resolution, you just need two clauses to be there to justify the fact that you're adding a certain clause. In those proof systems, to justify the addition of a certain clause, you need to check something against the entire formula, and not like locally by figuring out, oh, do these things exist? Okay, then I'm good. Things that are there, you need the absence of clauses as well to justify redundancy with all of those.
And sometimes strong closure and monotonicity, because it's just saying, I mean, I could think of alpha as adding something to my gamma also, right? I could add like the clauses enforcing alpha. And then if I could still by monotonicity imply C, then I would combine C with gamma and I would derive C under gamma. So it's sort of, maybe in a formal sense, monotonicity and strong closure are fairly close.
Yeah, they're not that distant. Okay. And I have one more definition, right, which is tedious one. This is called generalized expansion, but purely for historical reasons. It was actually the first redundancy-based system, and at that point, it was literally generalizing expand resolution. It's actually a version of this BC proof system, where you have a limited amount of deletion. So this definition may seem a bit unnatural. It's because I'm actually showing a different definition than the original one to highlight the fact that this is doing some deletion. So let's parse this. So in this generalized expand resolution system, a proof is a BC proof of some subset of the original formula that you're given, such that any clauses that you lost when you're moving to the subset, you have to rederive them. So anyway, this allows you, gives you a little bit more independence in the order of addition of the clauses. Because in these proof systems, you also need to be careful with the order that you're adding clauses. If you have a bunch of clauses that are blocked with respect to the formula, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to derive all of them in sequence. Okay. So what this system allows you to do is, it says, okay, maybe I cannot derive some of these clauses that I want, but I can only derive them if I remove some clauses. So how about I remove those temporarily, add the clauses that I wanted, and add back the clauses that I just temporarily lost. Okay, this definition may sound contrived, but the original one, I promise, is actually nice. And then, what do we know about these systems? So the reason why those are at least theoretically interesting is because they have upper bounds for all those principles. And what do I mean by those principles? So in proof complexity, what you do is you take some combinatorial principle or some principle with a really simple known proof and go to a really weak proof system and say, well, if I have some formula that encode this principle, can I prove these principles with short proofs? So the pigeonhole principle, I already told you, it says that you can have an injective mapping from n+1 elements to n elements, which is unsatisfiable, so we refuted. And the bit pigeonhole principle is a different encoding of that one. So the parity principle says that on a graph that you cannot have a graph on an odd number of vertices such that every vertex has degree 1. The click coloring principle says that you cannot have a graph such that it has a k-click and is simultaneously k-1 colorable. So those are all simple facts, but the proof systems that are being studied in proof complexity have a hard time, some of them at least, have a hard time refuting those. Satan, let's get into that. Orification and exorification are syntactic manipulations that you do to formulas to make them harder, and lifting with index gadgets is another version of the same idea where you lift lower bounds on weaker computation models to stronger computation models by playing with the formula syntactically. So what do I mean by upper bounds? By upper bounds, I mean of those proof systems that I told you about, some have short proofs of all of those without using any new variables. If you are allowed to go to extend resolution, then you already easily have short proofs of all of those. But for instance, for resolution, you do not, and for many other systems, you do not. And this is because the encodings of those formulas are quite symmetric, and the systems that I just told you about are able to, in a sense, see through symmetries or break symmetries. Okay, and then that cuts the entire search space by a lot. And then you can repeat that kind of reasoning to basically formalize the informal kind of reasoning that you are using when proving these principles by pen and paper, like manually and informally. And in terms of lower bounds, a few things are known. And by lower bounds, I mean, for instance, that the pigeonhole principle, any proof of it in this generalized extended resolution system, which is BC with a little bit of deletion, requires exponential. And similar thing holds for the bit pigeonhole principle for rat minus. And aside from that, there are no lower bounds for those systems. And in terms of simulations, it's known that if you give a system deletion, at least as far as we know, it collapses almost all of the systems. In that, I mentioned that we could have DVC, DRAT minus, DSBC, DSPR, all those versions. If you give them deletion, then DVC minus ends up simulating every single one of them. So deletion actually buys you a lot of power in that sense, because I'll actually show that there are separations across those systems if you don't have deletion, and there are no non-simulations without deletion, except the obvious ones, where one system generalizes the other one, so that the general system immediately simulates the other one. So, what are the new results? This is my summary of the new results. The red ones are new, and let me explain what I mean by the arrow. First of all, the proof systems here are laid out suggestively, so I kind of try to make a cube out of the systems. You have 3 axes. So you start with this simple redundancy criteria. So this is resolution plus block clause addition without any numerator. And then you say, well, let's call this the deletion axis. What if I give it a little bit of deletion, and then you get this generalized deletion? What if I give it arbitrary deletion? You can delete anything anywhere in the proof, even at the start, and then you get this proof. And so this x-axis, let's say, is the deletion. And this y-axis is where you say, instead of something is tautological, you say that thing is tautological or substitute. Okay, and you can go up in this axis from anywhere. You could have an analog of the minus as well, but it's not already defined, and there's not that much reason to define it at this point. And then this z-axis is where you say, instead of looking at a distinguished literal that I'm gonna flip, how about multiple literal? So for instance, from BC minus, you go to SBC minus by saying, okay, instead of that P distinguished literal, I will look at that a set of literals that I'm allowed to flip. And then I will also say that the thing that I get at the end, the clause that I'm checking, is either tautological or something. Okay. And this way, you can see which systems generalize which ones, and some simulations here are trivial. For instance, this simulation is trivial, this simulation is trivial, this simulation is trivial as well. What's not trivial is, for instance, going in this direction, that you can simulate DRAT minus by DVC minus is not obvious, because DRAT minus is a generalization of DVC minus, but a DVC proof, the DRAT minus proof is not necessarily a valid proof in DVC minus, so you have to do some work to convert that proof into a proof in DVC minus, then not that much longer. And so solid arrows are simulations, like I've been talking about. And then you have arrows like this that are cut in the middle. This says that this system simulates this one, but it's also separated from this one in the sense that there is a sequence of tautologies such that they have short proofs here, but yes.
So your arrow is pointed at the middle one.
Yes. An arrow from P to Q says that P simulates Q. Okay. So yeah, this system simulates this one and is also strong. So yeah, like I was saying, there's an example such that it has short proofs here, but requires long proofs here, and yes, similar separations here. Those are what we are showing. Those are the new ones. And by that minus lower bound that I just mentioned in the previous slide, you get actually these two separations and all the previously odd ones. And then I have one more thing for separation, because you can have separation without a system simulating another one. For instance, here these two systems are incomparable in the sense that neither simulates the other one, but there is a sequence of formulas such that it has short proofs here but long proofs here, and then there's another sequence of formulas such that it has short proofs here but long proofs. So the strength of these is incomparable with respect to simulation. Then I have a version of this that is single directional, and this says that there is a sequence such that it has short proofs here but requires long proofs. In that this doesn't simulate here, so there will not be an error here, but we don't know about this. This circle might turn into an arrow and then solidify here if it has equivalent simulation here. So yeah, those are the things being proved. And to
So the blob is like on the weaker side in a separation.
yes,
Okay. Just as the arrowhead.
and I interpret this as saying this could turn into something else, but you know this that nothing will appear here. So this is like a blank, uncertainty. And these four are the weakest systems that are BC minus that are studied. So you almost have a complete picture in the sense that things that are qualitatively different, the rules themselves are qualitatively different, they turn out to be quantitatively incomparable as well. So you don't have any surprising simulation points. I mean, here you could have a surprising simulation, but here, for instance, you don't have a surprising simulation where a little bit of deletion buys you that or subsumed power, for instance. And the upper bounds that I showed in the previous slide, they're all true for this SPR minus system, which is along with this one, possibly the most interesting out of the ones that you're seeing in the picture, because you don't have deletion, you don't have new variables. You're only deriving clauses out of clauses, and still you're able to prove most of these principles, or all of these principles that you've seen efficiently. And this SPC is slightly weaker in that you lose some of the upper bounds that you've seen in the previous slide, but you still retain some of the upper bounds, some of the other upper bounds. So these two are quite strong. And how else do we know that they're strong? We are not able to prove any lower bounds for these two right now, and that's possibly the most pressing question about this entire picture right now. And actually, if we were able to prove any lower bounds on this one, the techniques that I will talk about later on, with some more work, we can generalize them to get those separations. So there is like a conditional separation as well. So that in that sense, the picture is not complete. But if you could, if you could give me as a black box the lower bounds, then I would give you back the separations here, completing this picture. But for now, it's incomplete because of our inability to prove lower bounds for this system. And the lower bounds rely on this notion, which is a relaxation of the stimulation that I just told you about. So I told you that a system simulates another one if you can convert proofs in one into another one, into proofs in the first. So there is this notion of effective stimulation, which was studied for an entirely different reason than the one in this talk. But it says that roughly, I will not define it formally, maybe later on the board. It says that while translating the proof, you are allowed to change the thing that you're proving, as long as you don't change it in a way that changes its satisfiability states. So you can apply any satisfiability preserving transformation to the formula that you are proving while moving between proofs. But this is a more relaxed notion because the stimulation is an effective stimulation where this transformation would be identical. You don't change the formula. And there are not that many effective simulations known, which are interesting. So one is known about this BC minus proof system, which doesn't have new variables, but effectively simulates expanded resolution, all the way up there in the zero proof system. And the way you do it is you take your formula, append to it some new variables in the two clauses that you're seeing here, And then this new formula, this the new variable already there, suddenly have a BC minus group, which is technically without new variables, because you've already given the new variables as part of the formula. So in that sense, it's maybe not that interesting, but we will see later that all of the systems we have generalized BC minus. So all of them have this exact effective simulation of external resolution. But you can give them in different ways, such that there will be new variables in the formula, but they will be useful only to one of the two systems, which will allow us to say, well, if some formula is easy for external resolution, then it's easy for this system as well. But the other one, it doesn't gain anything from these new variables being there because they will be inaccessible to that other system. And I will give quickly how this actually works and also show you the causes for that are used in external resolution. So the gist of this argument is that you consider a use of the expansion. Let's say it introduces some new variable xi over some literals that are coming from the previous theorem. Then if you were doing extended resolution only, you would be adding this clause without this literal, and this clause without this literal, and this clause. And these are just the three of those just from the CNF from this one. So instead, in this effective simulation, you need to have this not y neutral, because otherwise this clause will not be blocked. So we want this clause to be blocked. It will be blocked for not xi. And you need to check it against this clause. Well, I need the result to be tautological. Clearly, or not clearly, but not necessarily P, I want to leave some freedom for P, because P doesn't have to be one of the x's. So I make the result tautological by just appending not y here so that these two are in the result. And you do the similar thing here, and here you don't need to do much. Because it will only be checked against these two clauses, and the results will be tautological because you have not P here and T here, and not here and Q here. You get these clauses, but these are not quite the clauses that you actually wanted, because these not y's are extra. So that this is not yet the CNF of this one. But then you also included this y to cheat. So you just resolve these clauses against y to get exactly this. And in this manner, you can replace the use of the expansion rule by block prohibitions that do not use new variables. Again, technically, those are not new variables because they're already in the formula. Yeah, and then whatever resolution steps the external resolution proof has, you can just replicate them as is in the BC minus group. So we'll use this idea, like I said, to prove separations across the whole system, all of which effectively simulates external resolution. And if you're familiar with effective simulations, you might say, this is actually not how it's defined. You need that translation to be polynomial time as well. That is true. I mean, nobody asked, but this actually does make that. You could say, I'm giving you all the extension clauses, not just the variables, and then resolution in this sense effectively simulates external resolution. But here we use this notion. Originally, you had the constraint that the translation that you were doing to the formula run in polynomial time. Just keep that in mind so that not to conflate the two notions. Okay, and I call those guarded extension variables after something else in the literature, which is vaguely similar, which comes up in another separation between regular and general resolution. Regular is a distinction of general resolution. Okay, so remember, we will have a formula which has short proofs in external resolution, and we had this translation which made it easy for BC. So to separate two systems, which will be one of the four systems, each will be one of the four systems that we talked about, we will incorporate extension variables in ways that are different than this, in such a way that it's useful. These new variables can only be used by one of the systems, but not both. And we will guard the variables by clauses to make them hard classes. And I will again make this in the second half if you want. But roughly, we exploit the idea that these proof systems, some are able to derive things that are plain not derivable at all in the other system. So in this way, we will prevent the extension clauses or any clause that meaningfully uses the new variables from being derivable in so for the upper bound, we'll say, okay, one of the systems can still simulate the extended resolution by working through whatever you included. And for the other one, we will say it's essentially closed under restrictions that satisfy, not all restrictions, but restrictions that satisfy the extension variables so that they will disappear from the formula. And this will show that they're unable to achieve any speed up. Now, just show you the construction.
We should probably move to the end and then leave the technical details for the second.
Okay. This is the formula that separates. I will show this in the second half. This is another formula that separates. These are just like slightly trickier ways of including the new variables in the formula. And yeah, I'll finish. What do we have as a result here? Easy separations, and I'm saying easy because you do much less work than you would be doing if you were pairwise, proving separations pairwise between those proof systems in a non-modular way, in the sense that you can reuse known results as well when proving separations pairwise. You need to find some principle that is easy for one, hard for the other, and then converse, and then do this for all the pairs. So in the way that I described, you don't have to do that much work. And this gives an almost complete picture of these systems. And there are some open questions. So I already said the most pressing one, I think, is putting any lower bounds for SBC. And also, improved complexity, people generally like separations that use natural combinatorial proofs, because it says something intuitive about what the proof systems are able to achieve. The ones that I showed are quite artificial and do not say that much about the systems, although you need to understand the systems to be able to come up with these constructions. And also the study of those systems is kind of disjoint from the existing study of proof complexity, in that there's not that much known about how they relate to the other proof systems. It is known that some quite strong system doesn't even simulate BC minus unless it also simulates expanded resolution. But the converse I find more interesting. So if there's some system that is above resolution that you can simulate with this deletion, but without the variable. And finally, there's another system that allows you to do something similar to without loss of reasoning, and the relation of that one to those systems is also unknown. So there's another thing that could be settled, and that's it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Do you have any natural combinatorial principles in mind, or is this more like future work?
Yeah, I do. I do, but not for. Oh, yeah, not for these separations. But it's unclear what you can do with GR and that minus and BC. They're quite weak. I think they're not that far from resolution, although they are separated from resolution. But it's hard to express combinatorial what exactly they are achieving, while it's much easier for SPC in that you can say some symmetries I can take advantage of, or SPR, some symmetries I can take advantage of. I have the candidates for here, this separation, which would be the more interesting separation out of all of those. Bit pigeonhole principle, I think, is hard for this one, and Satan also might be hard for this one. And if I were able to prove those, actually, repeat analogous constructions to what I showed, get those separations. So that's why I'm saying it's the most pressing one, because we could simultaneously give you separations here, and then I would give you simultaneous separations here. So a single lower bound would give 3 separations.
So all of this is motivated by the need for various types of stat solvers to generate proof.
Not exactly.
Well, no, it is. So
yeah.
But my question is, when you do this kind of without loss of generality in what kind of situation do stat solvers actually make that kind of proof in the proof,
For instance, they do something of bounded variable elimination, which is actually, I think, according to practice, one of the most crucial techniques. They eliminate some variables by taking all results over that variable, and they do this only if the number of results is not too high. You need, for instance, deletion to be able to do that. And then you have converse of this one as well. I don't know the exact techniques that would correspond to each of the proof systems. But I don't know if explicitly they carry out symmetry reasoning in modern CDCL solvers or not. But if they do, you can then formalize whatever they're doing.
Because actually discovering asymmetry seems kind of difficult.
Yes, but still there are heuristics.
No, discovering asymmetry is actually that easy.
Okay.
Like graph isomorphism is like a super simple problem in practice. Anyway, you want to talk, no, it's one of these weird problems, right? That we sort of, Baba is beating around the bush trying to, and it's amazing that we have quasi-polynomial, upper bounds for this. In practice, if you ever want to solve any, isomorphism or that kind of problem, you solve it in no time. There are no hard instances. So one thing that you can do, I guess this is sort of one angle at it. You can actually take, so one motivation is like when you run a modern SAT solver and you have a formula of 1 million instances and there are lots and lots of advanced techniques, it can dump a proof which you can then like machine check afterwards, which is much easier than the algorithm.
Sure.
So like a dead stupid proof that you go over it line by line and then say, okay, I don't understand all of these fancy heuristics, but like I can check the proof line by line and I believe the claim of this formula is not that. And this is like nice. Okay, now one thing you can do, you take your SAT solver, you first power up naughty or saucy or some symmetry breaking thingy. It says, oh, this formula is highly symmetric. Let me throw tons of symmetry breaking clauses that don't follow from the formula, but they're like without loss of generality clauses. Things like without loss of generality, pigeon 1 goes into hole 1, without loss of generality, okay. And now you're on your solver and it says on SAT, and you have this proof just as before, except for but these symmetry breaking clauses that came out of nowhere, like how do I know that those are correct? So then you want to take like a proof system that is still as dumb as possible, but can do some limited symmetry reasoning. That's why we were obsessing about this efficiently verifiable thing. Like I can add this without loss of generality because it's very easy to check how to like patch my truth values.
I cannot hear you, Jakob, anymore. Hello? Hello? I cannot hear anymore.
Can we hear if I do this?
Now I hear you again.
Yeah, but we don't have the mic. Okay, I guess we lost the sound. So I think we'll thank Emre again. And then we'll see if we can. Okay, so now we have like the seminar ends. For those who wish to hear more about technical details, we'll be starting in say 10 minutes. And then hopefully we'll have sound up and running again. Sorry about the technical glitches. Okay, so let's see if we can do some proofs now. Emre will walk us through some selected highlights.
Yeah, first I actually put this in the paper as well. So I, in the talk, said something about converting rat proofs to BC proof. This started by Marijn asking me, can you do rat, so a simulation of rat in BC without deletion? This deletion, they already knew how to do it. So initially I wasn't working towards the separation. Actually, I was just doing my best simulation. And then I wrote down a best simulation, which doesn't refer to the competing subsystem. So it's not a trivial simulation. You actually do look at the rat proof and learn something from the rat proof and then convert it into a BC proof. But of course, that's not a efficient simulation, or due to bad terminology, that's not efficient, but that's not a simulation, that's a partial simulation in the sense that the size can blow up when you do that simulation. But the thing is, the way you carry out that simulation is if you do write the partial simulation, you have a dependence on some parameters. And when I show you the formulas, you may say, well, where do these even come from? And the way I discovered them, at least, is by working hard at the simulation, doing my best, and then saying, what can I do now that derive this simulation parameters to the worst case? And the instance that I showed actually derives them to the worst case. In a rather easy way, actually. So this was the formula that separates rat from BC, since we are forgetting about GER right now.
Yes.
So you take some formula, now there is part for resolution.
So again, what do we want to do now? We have no deletion. No, wait, we have no new variables. So we're in the minus systems.
And no deletion. And I want to separate rat from BC. I want to show something is hard for BC while being easy for rat.
Oh, and we also don't want deletion because then that, as you mentioned, then
There's already a simulation.
okay.
All of the simulations that use deletion are not completely trivial, but not that hard either. It's mostly syntactic. And they depend on being able to have some intermediate things that in the systems without deletion would cause the size to blow up. But now you can forget about them. So everything works out fine. You can do a step-by-step simulation, so they're not overly clever simulations. So yeah, first of all, also know that we have lower bounds for BC. So the pigeonhole principle is hard for BC. And that you can see immediately from the resolution lower bound, just by looking at what kind of clauses could I derive in BC on top of pigeonhole principle. It only gets you as far as the onto functional pigeonhole principle, which is still hard for resolution. And that's it. So then you say, well, pigeonhole principle is apparently easy for, difficult for block clauses.
So you're saying you're making the formal claim that in BC and minus, anything that I can add to the pigeonhole principle is subsumed by the onto functional?
Yes.
Is that easy to see?
Basically just look at the kinds of clauses and you say, okay, if I were to derive a clause without new variables that would be blocked upon this literal, what would that clause need to include? And then you have the two sets of clauses that say it's functional and then that it's onto. Those are the only possibilities. You just basically literally inspect the shapes that the clauses would need to take to have those tautological conditions. And I also, while doing this, I'll say that there's something the more about BC that it seems that helps with these lower bound arguments, because how do you create the circumstance that with respect to a certain literal there are no block clauses? So if I wanted to make my job really easy, I would prevent BC from being able to do anything beyond resolution, while rat is able to do something. So then all of these separations the proofs are not that complicated. Maybe the actually interesting part is just try to understand the syntactic capabilities of the systems and say, what can this do that this cannot do? And then you isolate that into some small gadget, let's say, that you tack onto the formula. And the most interesting one is maybe that I have a partial simulation, which is not maybe polished enough to present on the board right now, but a partial simulation of GER by SBC. So that's the most interesting one at least according to it, because you have some deletion and something that doesn't have deletion. But because the deletion is temporary, you can look backwards and forwards in the proof to the point where you got rid of the clauses and where they're getting re-derived. And then you have a handle on multiple literals now that you can flip. And even if a clause was getting, it was blocked, let's say, for a different literal previously, you removed it, and then you're adding it back in a way that it is blocked for a different literal now, SBC can still handle that, handle in the sense that there is a non-trivial partial simulation, which you can again inspect really hard to construct a gadget, which would then separate SBC and GER if you had any SBC roll. But that's not in the scope. That I hope to use to complete that picture of the triangle that I had, if I ever manage to prove SBC roll. So anyway, yeah. So Mellon, what do I add to Mellon? And all the quick I said about this not being actually effectively polynomial simulations. So Picasso and Tantanam's version says this needs to be the translation that you apply to the formula needs to be both satisfiability preserving and computable in the polynomial time. So what I do requires knowing the number of expansion variables used in this short extended resolution proof of formula, so you cannot discover that in polynomial time as far as I know. So these are not effectively polynomial simulations; these are effective simulations. Although they never have to about that. I have this, and then I have I will write by this to me the number of expansion, usable expansion in short extended resolution proof that I assuming I somehow know about. And then you do something very simple. Okay, and this is, let's say, the ith extension variable there. You take this, the disjunction of this one with this entire formula again. Okay, then this is a ENF where you just attach x to every one. And you do the same for this formula now I'm saying is easy for rats to use these x's to simulate the extended resolution proof. In fact, the extended resolution proof of gamma from this is a rat proof without any modifications.
What are we assuming about gamma? Gamma is easy or hard?
Gamma is something hard for BC minus.
Okay.
And by hard, I mean it's not satisfiable. It's not that hard. It's unsatisfiable, but hard. Okay.
Okay.
So the size is not difficult.
But easy for rat?
Doesn't matter. I don't even need to know whether gamma is easy for rat or not. Otherwise, if I had that information, gamma would be the separating formula. So all I know is gamma by itself is hard for BC.
Oh, but you haven't, we're assuming an extended resolution upper bound. Is that, I mean,
Yes.
somewhere there's an upper bound.
Yes, somewhere there is an upper bound that I will also steal. And so I don't even want to work for the upper bound.
Okay.
So you basically.
So it's hard for BC. Gamma could be the pigeonhole principle, for instance.
Gamma will be the pigeonhole principle, yes.
Okay.
And so I just want something that separates extended resolution from the weaker system in this separation. And the stronger system, I don't care. Because it will only simulate the extended resolution. Maybe it's easy for, and there is nothing that says that the pigeonhole principle is hard for rat. Only the big pigeonhole principle is hard, as far as you know. So yeah. Okay, so any extension clause immediately rat. Why? Because you can I write it or not? Let's say. So you have something like this. Right? These are the literally derived at this step. So I want to derive that as a rat clause for xi. I only need to check it against those clauses. And I only need to check that for each clause in the pigeonhole test or whatever gamma is. That clause plus these two literals is implied by unit propagation, but that clause is already there, so it stops here naturally. So I could just add it. Okay.
Let's see what we're saying. So this is something that, again, the extended resolution proof does this, and we want to mimic it. And your trick has given us that xi is no longer a new variable.
Yes.
Because it exists. And this thing is now wrapped because it's wrapped on x.
Because I only need to check it against all the clauses in this CNF.
And they are clearly, I mean, gamma is around.
Yes.
So it's like a, yeah.
So I literally take the external resolution proof that is a valid value here.
However, if I, so sort of just to emphasize how brittle these things are, I could say, oh, but I require that, like when you present the original CNF formula to me, oh, please clean it up so that,
Minimally unsatisfied.
yeah, or just at least like there aren't clauses in your original input subsuming each other. But maybe you could get around that by playing with them a little bit.
You could resolve those. I think I wrote it in this way because it was easier to do the lower bounds.
I mean, like I could introduce a bunch of other clauses in, like split every clause in gamma on and introduce some extension variables so that
I personally don't do it.
Yeah,
you could have that as well. So
like if I'm disturbed by this obvious subsumption, then there would be a syntactic way around it. This is what we're saying. Okay.
But still, there is some written, I think, about which maybe says that for these systems to be interesting in proof complexity, their definitions need to be more restricted, because this effective simulations feels like something you shouldn't allow to happen, or I don't know. Maybe it's like you need to separate the capabilities of those systems when you have such formulas and when you have formulas that are minimally unsatisfiable, so they're truly like a core that by itself is meaningful here, or you don't have any meaning.
Okay, so where are we now? We took gamma that has an extended resolution proof, and now you say clearly will be, oh, you want to show, I guess, two more clauses.
Yeah.
But they're going to be okay for the same reason. Okay.
So for these clauses, you also, of course, need to check them against this, but we already know from DC that you can do that. So you have added those that finishes that prove that this is easy for rats, regardless of that it's easy going easy.
So right, so I recover all of the definitions, and since I'm asserting ratness on the different xi's, there's no, I was worrying about interference, but you're going to do this before the proof even starts, kind of, sort of.
Yes.
In a pre-processing phase, I'll recover all of these clauses. Once I'm done, then you're just going to do honest resolution the rest of the way, so I don't need to worry.
Yes.
Where's the not excellent or something?
Oh, these are the three clauses that are.
But are they in your formula?
No. Okay, sorry, I skipped.
So this is what extended resolution is doing.
Yeah,
right?
that would be what
I'm basically taking the extended resolution.
Yeah.
Pushing all the extensions to the beginning. Okay, I'm looking at them in order. So the proof now has the shape that it makes a bunch of definitions which are recursive, which are going to be recursive. But again, I will always have this precious condition. So I will have the definitions and then the resolution. I'm saying that proof literally itself, without any modification, is a rat minus proof of this formula, not of this formula because it introduces new variables, but of this formula, it is a valid rat minus proof, that extended resolution, because whenever the extended resolution does this, and it actually does this because you're talking about resolution, the rat proof will do exactly the same thing because those are rat clauses, those are block clauses, or would be block clauses if you didn't have those. But those are rat clauses for these x's. And the way to check that is to look at the condition. Okay, it says that for all the possible things that I could resolve this against, which is all of the clauses that are here, and clear what I mean here, right? So the entire theorem. all of the resolvers are some clause of this plus these two literal, but those are substitute. And substitute clauses are automatically reverse clause, implied by reverse clause. Here you do a similar check against those, but also you do a check against those. But these are blocked with respect to them. And but red generalized is blocked with so.
And you don't need, I mean, I could, instead of gamma in this big and, I mean, I could pick the first clause in gamma, I guess, if I want to.
It depends then the lower bound. For the lower bound, it's important that it's something that is hard for B to match.
Oh, yeah,
I'm trying to
okay.
balance, like I have
For the upper bound, yeah, okay. But you're saying for the lower bound, it,
For the upper bound, or the original BC simulation is already working for all the systems, but it's working for BC as well.
okay.
So it doesn't help when trying to separate one system from another. So you come up with these by just inspecting what can this system do.
Okay,
That's
does
the
this make sense? Okay, so now we need we need to argue that BC minus cannot
yeah.
decrypt.
Yeah, and shall I do the whole proof, or maybe the crucial thing in the proof I will tell you about first. This thing is, so let me define. So given a formula, not gamma, but alpha. Let me define something called the projection of delta onto the P as I'll write it in shorthand. So
P is the literal now.
yes, P is the literal. P or P is a clause in. I'm just saying this set of clauses are the ones that I will check. I'm just isolating that into another CNF. Okay, and so this is a CNF. This is CNF that okay, I look at all the clauses that contain some distinguished literal. I just take that away and then look at the CNF that these are made. Okay, so I have like this an entire CNF, and some clauses are starting with P here. Let's suppose I ordered them so that they, I don't know. I'm looking at this CNF here that you get, which may be satisfiable, unsatisfiable, you don't know. Okay. And what is it? When is the clause BC? So, and then I'm looking at some clause Q, only actually. Okay. I want to look at it only because I define it this way. Then check whether this is BC or not. Right. What I do is I look at this projection, go through every clause here, and say, is this C prime, and let's say the clause here, D1 prime, D2 prime, and so on. Is C prime, D1 prime, tautological or not? Is C prime, D2 prime, tautological or not? And I want all of these to hold at the same time. So then what does this mean? This means that the assignment, that is the negation of C prime, is a satisfying assignment to this projection. The block clauses are actually, in a sense, satisfying assignments to these little projections in the formula. Okay. What I do here is I make that projection unsatisfiable, so that there are no blocked clauses for xi or not xi with respect to this formula. Xi and not xi can make other appearances because you could do some resolutions in here, or they could appear as in clauses that are
Okay, so this is where you actually want all of gamma.
Yes, yes. And the way you actually discover this is, since we don't have that much time, I will get into it, but in converting a rat proof into a BC proof, you look at this projection, take away the clauses that are already tautological, where they make up a tautological result, and look at the remaining thing. And you basically add assignments by negating them and having them in clause form as block clauses until the projection in the resulting formula turns unsatisfiable. At that point, what can you do? You need to refute that. And then attach to that refutation the clause that you're trying to derive. So then you added a bunch of block clauses and then did a resolution derivation of the rat clause in these. And that's pushed to the worst case when that projection is hard for resolution, and or when it's if it's satisfiable, such that if you add the best possible set of satisfying the negations of the best possible set of satisfying assignments, such that the resulting resolution is short, you could get a possibly short derivation of the rat clause in BC. But if you start with something that is already unsatisfiable, then all you have to go through a refutation of that projection. And BC doesn't give you anything in terms of being able to add something that is blocked with respect to the same metric. But that only is the best simulation if the best simulation is local, in the sense that if you're trying to simulate a rat proof, if it derives a clause that is a rat for not P, then does the best simulation of best general simulation of rat by BC also have to derive a clause or some clauses that are blocked for not P. Okay, with that assumption, like if you had to do that, then in this best simulation, you can push that simulation to the worst case by just picking it to be something unsatisfiable and hard for BC. So that's what prevents BC from accessing the new variables, because it cannot derive anything resembling the extension clauses from here on. And then the rest of the argument basically says, okay, I cannot have anything that is blocked for x's, but x's can make other appearances, or there could be other block clauses. But for all those block clauses, suppose you could add them, and then you hit the entire set of clauses that you could get in that manner with a restriction that satisfies the x's, and the result becomes something that BC could arrive at from gamma. But we know that that doesn't give you any short proofs of the pigeonhole principle in BC. So then with this formula, BC doesn't get any speed ups over just starting from gamma.
The camera froze for some reason.
Oh.
Your hello, you still hear us, Thomas?
Am I still?
No, he cannot move in my big picture. Still from.
Hear what we're saying.
No, I think my laptop died again. Is it that it's not charging fast enough?
No.
Yeah, it's not. Very well. Mine is.
Okay. It seems we have technical problems. Sorry. But did you switch? Is this on?
It was charging at some point.
It was charging at some point, but it's not charging now.
No.
something else, some other variable, and then in some sense, are we arguing then by anti-monotonicity that blocked derivation step is something you could have done if only gamma was around?
Yes. So
Okay.
that even if you somehow have x's appearing and you even were resolving upon these x's, those steps are worthless because the proof in the end with those resolutions or with those block clause additions that involve x's will still be preserved if you hit the entire proof with a restriction that sets all xi to true.
What is not immediately clear to me is if I do something stupid, like I do some partial derivation resolve on the gamma clauses on something, so that I now get a resolvent that is somehow speaking about xi and xj. So like I take one clause from the xi copy and another clause from the xj copy and then another clause from maybe the xl copy. What do I know? And I resolve them somehow and generate a new clause.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here is where non-deletion comes into play. You can say whatever, I don't care about these deletion steps. Whatever was blocked is blocked with respect to the original formula. Let me go back to that.
Oh yes, well, whatever derivation you have, however complicated it is, it has clauses that are subsumed by something like any block clause addition in that formula is subsumed by some block clause for this. So you're not going anywhere further than just running BC on this.
And it sounds like you're saying also, okay, so but like, okay, in BC minus without loss in reality, you have like a pre-processing phase where you're generating block clauses.
Yeah.
And then you do the resolution proof.
Yeah, that's actually that's why the proof is written in a different way than for the RAT lower bound and for the BC lower bound, because for the BC lower bound it's a bit easier because you can at some point make it devolve into a resolution proof of a pre-processed formula. For the RAT proof, you cannot do the same thing, so you need to go like do an inductive proof that says, okay, I can then, if you had this, then I could derive the restricted version, RAT with some penalty and stuff like that. So, but yeah, this is like the easier work.
Okay.
But you see, so this is basically saying this is the correspondence of block clauses to satisfiability. How do I make this go back to resolution? Then you just happens.
Okay. If we just say we just have a few more minutes, is there some other separating formula for which you can just provide the gist, the high level idea, like why does this fly?
Yeah. Again, you have this. Okay. This time you do it differently. So this is for separating both of GER and SBC from RAT. So this here, the difference between GER and BC actually is important. And SBC, so I will use the same formula to separate both SBC and GER from RAT.
So now SBC can do something that RAT cannot.
Yes, and GER can do something else on the same formula that RAT can.
Okay.
I have the same thing happening. Then what I add is these yi's are also fresh. And for each xi, I have some yi. I basically say xi if and only. Just this. Okay. So this allows, again, STC and GER to simulate the extended resolution proof, although it's no longer exact, you don't take it exactly. But RAT cannot go much, cannot make much with those. So for the upper bound, The GER one is really easy. Because it's a trick. So you say, I start my BC derivation from here. I just got rid of those. Okay. I added all the extension clauses because they are blocked, and I can add them.
Okay.
And this, at this point, you might say, aren't those new variables? There is like a delicate issue about deletion with those systems. Once you eliminate a variable, if you add a clause that has that variable, are you in the same system or not? Though the definitions are robust with respect to that change. So you could carry around these variables in such a way that you never have to invoke that stronger notion of deletion.
Okay.
Okay, so you just got rid of everything, added the extension clauses in the variables of the original formula, and then you basically add those back as blocked upon these y's. Because y is now a new variable with respect to the formula, and not y makes it called blocked because the only clause to check against is this one. So that's like the GER of the block. Okay. For SBC, you do it differently. Instead of directly deriving the expansion clauses, you do it like this. For instance, first you derive this. And this is not blocked, so this is set blocked for these two. And how do you check it? Think of its negation. So this is that xi is mapped to 0, and it's the assignment that falsifies it, and yi is mapped to 0. I touch this, but the other assignment then satisfies this. And similarly here, I touch this, but the other assignment satisfies this. So this is vacuously set blocked. And once you have this, then you can resolve this against this clause over y to get the actual clause that you are looking for. And then you want to go to the rest. The other side is similar.
Okay.
Okay. And well, the upper bound, the lower bound for this one is a little bit more complicated, but it's similar to how you would prove closure under restrictions for, let's say, resolution, where you say, okay, I hit the formula restriction, and then I go clause by clause and show that from the restricted derivation up until this point, I could somehow derive the restriction of the clause. In that, you say, well, I could pay some penalty and then still derive that clause. So maybe without going into that, the reason why Rat cannot do much intuitively here, but how you stumble upon this formula, like why would you think that this is right for Rat? Suppose you're trying to derive against something that is Rat for X. Okay. And suppose you're working with this subsumption version. In particular, whatever you're deriving needs to be subsumed by the result against this one. Okay, so in the clauses, in the Rat clauses that you're deriving for X and similarly for Y, somehow you need to carry around this Y because of this subsumption condition.
Wait, say again.
Intuitively, the reason is, so suppose you're working with the subsumption version of that, just to make it a little easier to think about it. If you're
And
trying,
we're now going to derive a clause that is wrapped on X.
yes.
Okay.
Now, this clause is always there, right? And it is something that you need to check again. So suppose I'm trying to derive something of this form. So I, in particular, want, with respect to this formula, this to be substituted. Okay. And the thing is, y's only appear here, and these clauses are blocked with respect to each other. So you are unable to get isolate y and get it out of these clauses in a meaningful manner, so that you can derive something like this, so that this check passes. This is
Um,
That's not the proof, but I'm just telling you intuitively, the reason to think that expect that this should be hard for that is along these lines. You need to carry around those lines, and the proof will also do.
What do you mean by carrying around those lines?
By carrying around those lines, I mean
They should contain not
yes,
Y.
yes, sorry, yes. C should contain this Y, which
They
you
should
then
contain not Y.
sorry. C should contain not Y, and then no.
why?
No?
I
No,
mean,
no. You need it to be subsumed.
Yeah. So
but if I tag on a bunch of, like I tagged on this extra variable that doesn't appear anywhere, why is that a problem of subsuming?
No, but then
How do the
then
y-axis
to-
score it for you?
that okay, then what you want is a clause here that doesn't contain Y. But if you want to get rid of Y here, the only thing that you could do with this clause to get rid of Y is to resolve it against something like this, but then you bring back on this X. Oh, so maybe, yeah, I should say not. Um,
So what are we trying to argue? You're saying we're introducing a clause that is rat on x side.
yes. And we somehow want to derive the extension clause, let's say, where this part is whatever, we want the extension clause to be at a particular step. But the extension clauses don't have any Y's in them.
But before the argument was slightly different, that whatever you could derive by block clause, you could do that from gamma originally. Now, don't you want to argue similarly, like
The actual proof is like that. I'm just
and I
the vague
guess I'm
idea.
not mapping the intuition to this formal proof. So what's like you're gonna say that somehow
well, you will have those clauses and you will have a rat derivation, and I will say, well, then I could take a partial assignment that sets the x's and y's to true and hit the reputation with that assignment, and I could then convert that into a similarly sized rat reputation of gamma. That's what we're doing.
okay.
And
Could you say that again, because that seems to be the key. So
I say that suppose you give me a rat reputation of this. I will hit that with a restriction that sets these x's and y's, one of them, to true. Okay, x is true, y is true in that derivation. And then, although these systems are not closed under restrictions, so if this system was closed under restrictions, I would be done, right? I will have a rat reputation of gamma immediately containing that. But it's not. So then you need to, like, by induction, piece by piece, convert the proof that you get after you hit the restriction into a valid rat proof of this one, where these variables are not making any difference. But then you take this to be something hard for rats minus big pigeonhole principle, and then you don't care whether that's easy or hard for SPC and rats. You know that it's easy for external resolution, and you have the upper bounds. So then you are done in that manner. Okay.
Any final questions or comments, thoughts?
I didn't think this part, that one. So you want to derive some clauses like this, right? And later you want to do some resolutions on, let's say, X, and then get rid of everything and eventually arrive at the empty clause. But this clause has to be ret. And there is a check that you have to perform against this being subsumed by the form. You need to say, well, the C needs to be such that somewhere in my rat derivation I'm trying to derive this. then the C needs to be such that because you're not losing this clause.
If you claimed xi or c by rat, then in particular c or yi is subsumed. Yes.
Yes. And then suppose you will want to get rid of this x somehow, but you also will want to get rid of this y. But what can you do to get rid of this y? This is not the reason, this is not the proof. What you can do is just resolve against something like this, or maybe you could be deriving something that is rat for not y. So you somehow make not y appear somewhere in the proof and resolve it against this one. We're saying whenever you do that, you tackle on something undesired here. You tackle on another new variable that you were actually trying to resolve upon to get rid of and continue with your proof.
I don't know if I'm missing, but so what you're saying is that if you wanted to add x or c, that means that this c or y, you should be able to derive that from unit propagation. So like there is a derivation of c or y.
Yes.
From what you have.
Mhm.
So then you can simply derive c or y, resolve it with xi or not y, and then you would get your c or x, and you're not even using the rats. Like it would just be a normal resolution derivation.
I like that argument better.
Hmm.
I think that's
Is it correct?
Yeah, maybe I can something.
yeah. Yeah, like suppose that x or c is rat on x, then in particular you can derive c or yi or even a subclause of that,
Mhm.
and then you just so actually, are you saying like then the proof would go like, okay, something like anytime you use rat on x then I actually get rid of those rat steps completely.
Mhm.
I'm not still sure what I should do about other. I mean, there could be other rat steps, but by monotonicity, those I could have carried out on gamma, I guess. But like that seems to be a way to get rid of any rat steps on xi's or yi's. I mean, it's symmetric.
Oh, you mean, okay, so for the intuition, you mean say that if you're deriving something that's x rat on xi, then whatever you're going to let you do with it, you could do with resolution as well.
No. So the argument is suppose that I derive xi. I'm trying to rephrase it. So suppose that xi or c is rat. Okay, then in particular, it's passing the rat conditions. Okay, but one of the rat conditions is that, well, I mean, xi or c, when I resolve it with not xi or yi, I in particular get c or yi. And that is apparently a reverse unit propagation clause. But that means that it's derivable by fully kosher standard resolution.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Let me do that standard fully kosher resolution derivation and then resolve back, and I eliminated your rat step. There is no rat step left.
Yeah.
And so this would be to argue that the proof doesn't ever do any rat steps on xi's or yi's, because those I can get rid of. And now if I think a little bit more, this will, okay, but any other rat steps, I guess by monotonicity, just getting rid of these annoying clauses couldn't hurt me. So then I'm doing, so whatever rat proof I did would then work on the, like I'm saying that I'll whatever rat proof you give me of this new formula, I'll turn it into a rat proof only on gamma.
Ah, right, okay, yeah. That is actually how the lower bound roughly.
Yeah.
I thought you.
And I sort of see, I see how that would go.
Yeah, I put the intuition that when you hit it, then you would be getting actually a resolution.
So some of the point is that this is sort of saying that the xi variables were not useful because they were tied together in an evil way. But if I can do this set thingy, then I can sort of simultaneously use xi and yi as the new variable. And then I can run my extended resolution. Okay. I think it's time to call it a day soon, unless there are any final questions, comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.